Let's talk about the different types of layers and the different channels you have access to inside of 3D-Coat. So 3D-Coat uses a physically based rendering workflow that is based off of roughness and metalness. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if we look at our texture editor, we have a few different images that we can look at. We can look at the color, we can look at the normal data, so this is the normal map. We can look at the roughness, and we can look at the text metal, which is just the metalness. Now, every single layer that you make inside of 3D-Coat has all of these channels on it. So what do they all do? Well, the color is pretty obvious. It's just the regular color. But what you can do inside of 3D-Coat is you can actually paint additional normals onto the normal map, and you can also paint these roughness and metalness attributes all with one brush stroke. So if I look at the normal map, you may have noticed this in the previous video, but if I start painting in an area here, you'll see that the normal map is now changed. And that's because this layer, layer 6, has depth information to it. If I decrease the depth opacity here to 0, you can see both in the 3D view and in the texture editor that that depth information goes away. I'm going to leave it on for now. So you can also paint roughness and metalness information. So to illustrate this, I'll paint one area with no metalness and some area with some metal. Now up here you'll see all these different channels. You have depth, smoothing, opacity, roughness, and metalness. So the reason why when we painted some depth is because we have depth information in there, and that's controlled by our brush strength. So I can bring that all the way down to 0, and we're no longer painting depth. But we are still painting some roughness. Now, the rougher a surface is, the more dispersed its specular highlights are going to be. So you see, if I paint this area with maximum roughness, you see we're not getting any kind of highlight, we're not getting any kind of reflection coming off of that area. But if I decrease my roughness down to 0, then you see we're getting a very, very strong, very clear reflection. Now for this next area, I'm going to just keep this at 50%. So then we also have metalness. So I can paint here, and I get a little bit of reflection, but it looks kind of like paint, as it should. But if I increase my metalness to 100%, it will actually look like it's made out of metal. And the difference between these is that when you're painting with no metal, what you're seeing is you're seeing a reflection of your environment. Actually, to make this a little bit more clear, let me do that again, but with 0 roughness. So, no roughness, or no metal, all metal. Okay, so what's happening is that when you have no metal, what you're seeing is you're seeing a reflection of the environment overlaid on top of the existing paint color and the colors underneath that in your mesh. When you have metal, you're no longer seeing the paint color. What the paint is doing is it's actually tinting the reflection. So the only thing we're seeing right now is the reflection just tinted green. And you can see one looks like it's made out of metal and the other looks like it's made out of plastic. So you have the ability to paint with all of these different channels in one go. Now typically when you're working with metalness, you want it to be either 100% or 0%. If you paint something that's kind of in the middle, it looks, well, let's just take a look. No metal, partial metal, all metal. It just tends to look sort of metal, sort of plasticky. Very few materials in the world have these kinds of surface properties, so it's usually you want to be either all metal or no metal. Very rarely do you want to be in between. Actually, let me redo that. By the way, that's Control Y in this to redo. If I look at my text metal now, you will see that we have mostly black because it's hardly any metal, and now we have white and we have gray. So that's showing us the metalness attributes as a texture map, with white being all metal and black being no metal. If I look at the roughness, then you'll see it's mostly white, meaning that it's 100% roughness. Then you see we have this very dark color for very low roughness values. So these are all different channels that are stored in every single layer, and we have control over each one of them individually. So on this layer I can turn down the metalness opacity to 0, so now those metal properties go away. Or I can turn down the roughness opacity so that everything just follows the base roughness of 100%, but we can still see a little bit of the metalness in there. So if I bring this up a bit, then you can still see that this is more metal and that's not. Now when you're painting, you might not want to paint all of these different attributes. If I increase my depth and I start painting, then you're seeing that I'm painting roughness, metalness, color, and depth all at once. So to turn that off, you can use these icons up here. If I turn off this purple one, that turns off my ability to paint normal maps. So you see one looks like it has depth and the other one does not. I can turn off the color and it will only paint new metalness, roughness, and depth information. So you see there's no color there. Or I can turn off the specularity, which will turn off my ability to paint roughness and metalness. So now you see it's only painting color and depth. You could turn 2 of those off, and then I'm only painting color now. But with that, those are the different channels that you have access to when you're painting inside of 3D-Coat, and they're all things you need to be mindful of. Alright, in the next video, I will talk about how to use these metalness and color and depth parameters in use with smart materials to make texturing a very fast and relatively simple process.